By 3 o'clock that July afternoon,
Looks like
the heat
everything is in
inside
working
Clara
order.
Hayes' barn had climbed past 100 degrees.
Dials look
Ventilation fans roared above the stalls. Water rushed into the raised
Knew it
tank.
would.
Tool batteries blinked green beside the feed room, and every
the
light
gravity
along the
feed.
center aisle was on.
The
Yet
meter
the
has
electric
stopped,
meter
but the
outside
water's
was
still
barely
flowing.
moving.
How is this
The
possible?
utility
It's
inspector
gravity-fed
crouched
now.
beside it,
No
wiped
electricity
sweat
needed.
from his forehead, and tapped the glass. This meter may be stuck. Clara stood beneath the roofline, where rows of faded solar panels stretched across mismatched steel rails. Some were blue, others were nearly black. Several carried white scars beneath the glass. None looked as though they belonged together. "The meter's fine," she said. The inspector glanced at the fans, then at the pump house, then back at the meter. "You're running all this?" Clara nodded. He stepped into the sunlight and studied the roof again. One panel had a cracked corner. Another showed a brown mark near its junction box. 3 still carried old auction numbers painted across their frames. They did not look like a power plant. They looked like debris someone had forgotten to haul away. A thermostat clicked. 2 fans slowed. The water tank reached its limit, and the pump shut off. The meter stopped completely. The inspector straightened. "What kind of system is this?" Clara looked toward the trough, where water continued flowing, even though the pump was silent. "Not one system," she said. 5 smaller ones. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but Clara was already watching the shadow of the barn creep across the gravel. 6 months earlier, those same panels had been stacked behind a liquidation warehouse beneath a red sign. Damaged, untested, no warranty. Everyone at the auction had laughed when Clara raised her number anyway. Freezing rain rattled against the auction shed that January morning, as Clara stood beside farmers bidding on rusted tractors, fencing, and dented grain bins nearby. At the far end of the yard, 50 solar panels leaned against 2 pallets beneath a red sign that read, "Damaged, untested, no warranty whatsoever." Some frames were bent, several connectors had been cut away, and one glass sheet carried a long white crack across its center like frozen lightning. Walt Mercer, the auctioneer, kicked the nearest frame and told the crowd the lot had come from a warehouse insurance claim after hail last spring. 50 expensive windows, he said, drawing laughter from 3 men beside Clara, and not one of them guaranteed to make a single watt ever again. Clara stepped closer, brushing rain from a faded label that listed voltage, current, and a manufacturing date nearly 11 years earlier in small print below. She did not know whether the panel still worked, but she knew nobody in the yard had connected a meter to it that morning yet. When bidding opened at $20, nobody raised a hand, so Walt lowered it to 10 and joked that firewood would produce more power anyway. Clara lifted her number, and the laughter stopped long enough for Walt to stare at her before asking whether she understood the words "no warranty." She said yes, then bid again when a scrap dealer offered 15, finally winning all 50 panels for $40 before fees and hauling costs. The farmers laughed harder when they watched her strap the mismatched stack onto a borrowed trailer that looked older than half the equipment being sold. By the time Clara left, hauling cost more than the panels, and one question followed her through the rain. Had anyone actually tested them before? The first electric bill arrived 3 days after Clara brought the panels home. She opened it at the kitchen table, beside a stack of feed invoices and the notice from County Agricultural Bank. $942. The barn had consumed more power in December than the farmhouse had used all autumn. Clara walked outside with the bill folded in her coat pocket and listened to everything demanding electricity. 2 ventilation fans groaned above the goat stalls. Heat cables kept the water lines from freezing. The well pump kicked on every few minutes. Security cameras blinked under the eaves. In the feed room, an old fluorescent fixture hummed even when nobody was inside. Her father had built the barn 30 years earlier, when electricity was cheap and every machine had one setting, on. Now the farm was 4 payments behind. Clara had already delayed replacing the north fence. She had sold the newer tractor, canceled the seed order, and started repairing equipment with parts pulled from machines abandoned behind the shed. A commercial solar contractor had quoted her $38,000 for a system large enough to support the barn. The bank refused another loan. Then the veterinarian called. If the summer came early, he warned, the old fans would not be enough during a power outage. Heat could take animals within hours. Clara looked toward the trailer, where 50 damaged panels stood under a tarp, dripping rainwater onto the gravel. She did not need to power the entire farm. She needed water, airflow, emergency lights, and enough electricity to keep the barn alive. 6 months remained before July. That evening, she carried the first panel into the workshop, cleaned the mud from its glass, and placed a small digital meter beside it. Garbage, Clara thought, did not come wired. At sunrise the next morning, Clara carried the cleanest panel into the yard and propped it against the south wall of the workshop. Frost still silvered the grass, but a narrow blade of sunlight had cleared the ridge. She clipped the meter leads to the panel's cables. Nothing happened. For a moment, the laughter from the auction returned to her. 50 expensive windows. Then she noticed one connector was packed with mud. She cleaned it with a small brush, clipped the leads again, and watched the display flicker. 31.8 volts. Clara stared at the number, disconnected the meter, and repeated the test. 31.7. The panel was producing power. She dragged out a second module, one with a bent frame and cloudy glass. It produced less, but the reading held steady. A third panel had a cracked corner and still delivered voltage. The fourth looked almost new and produced nothing. By noon, Clara had stopped judging them by appearance. She numbered every frame with white paint and opened a black notebook on the workbench. For each panel, she recorded visible damage, open circuit voltage, connector condition, and whether the reading remained stable when a shadow crossed the glass. The work was slow. Her fingers went numb. Twice, she wrote down the wrong number and had to begin again. But the pattern grew clearer. Some panels were dead, some were dangerous, others were simply weaker than the labels promised. By sunset, 14 panels marked as scrap had produced usable electricity. 3 of the best-looking modules had produced almost none. Clara closed the notebook and looked across the yard at the remaining stack. The auction had sold her 50 answers under one careless word. Now she had to discover which ones could safely work together without silencing the rest. Broken. By the end of the week, Clara had tested all 50 panels and covered the barn floor with 5 chalk lines. Green meant stable output. Blue meant weaker but predictable. Yellow marked panels with repairable connectors or junction box problems. Red meant unstable heat, cracked backing, or readings that changed without warning. White meant no safe path forward. She expected the cleanest panels to fill the green row. Instead, several faded modules with scratched glass produced steady current, while 3 polished panels failed whenever she connected even a small work light. Appearance had lied again. Clara tested each panel twice, once in full sun and once after a cloud crossed the ridge. She checked cables, photographed damaged backsheets, and watched for frames that warmed faster than the others. On Thursday afternoon, Dean Holloway arrived and walked between the chalk lines without smiling. He pointed to a cracked panel Clara had placed in blue. Voltage is not the same as safe power, he said. A panel can show a number on your meter and still fail under load. Clara moved it to red. By Friday night, 21 panels were green and 11 were blue. Those 32 had passed without repair. 6 sat in yellow, waiting for inspection. 8 remained red. 4 were marked white. Dean examined the yellow row. 2 needed new connectors and proper sealing. 4 were too damaged to return to service, but their frames and undamaged hardware could become spare parts. The totals made sense. Clara had not rescued 50 panels. She had found 32 workers, 6 questions, 8 warnings, and 4 endings. She had enough power to attempt her first array. What she did not know was that safe panels could still fail together. One weak module, placed in the wrong string, could silence every panel beside it. On Monday morning, Clara bolted the first 32 green and blue panels to a temporary wooden frame behind the barn. She arranged them by size because the edges lined up neatly, then connected the rows to an old inverter Dean had warned her not to trust without testing. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the display lit, the barn fan turned, dust lifted from the rafters, and Clara felt the first clean rush of victory since the auction. The fan slowed before completing one rotation. The inverter clicked off. Clara reset the fuse and tried again. Output climbed toward 2,000 watts, then collapsed below 400. A connector near the center began smelling like burned plastic. She killed the disconnect before the insulation softened. By noon, Dean stood beside the frame, studying Clara's perfect-looking rows. "You grouped them by appearance," he said. "I tested every panel, individually. A string only works as well as the current every panel can carry together." He pointed to the cleanest module in the row. Under load, its output had fallen far below the others, forcing the entire string to follow. Dean told her to replace everything with matched equipment or stop before someone got hurt. That afternoon, Walt drove past, saw the silent fan, and called through his open window. "How are those expensive windows working?" Clara said nothing. After sunset, she sat beside the failed array with the auction receipt in her pocket, close enough to quitting that she calculated what the panels might bring as scrap. Then she opened the black notebook. Just before dark, Clara removed the cleanest panel from the string and reset the inverter. The output rose. The fan turned. This time, it stayed steady. Failure had not proved Walt right. It showed Clara what to test next. At dawn Tuesday, Clara carried the rejected panel into the workshop and placed it beside the black notebook. The glass was flawless, the frame square, the label clean. Yet under load, it had weakened every panel around it. She stopped thinking about panels as a roof. She started thinking about them as a herd. Her mother had once kept breeding records for goats, in the same notebook Clara now used for voltage readings. Strong animals were grouped by temperament, age, and feed needs. A smaller goat was not useless. It simply could not be managed like the largest one. Clara drew new columns: current under load, voltage at heat, recovery after shade, and stability over time. For 3 days, she tested each green and blue panel again. She paired modules with similar behavior, not similar color or size. The strongest became Array 1. Stable lower output panels became Array 2. The yellow group stayed isolated until Dean could inspect the repaired connectors. By Friday afternoon, 5 smaller arrays stood behind the barn instead of one perfect-looking row. Clara switched on the first inverter. The output held. She switched on the second, still steady. The barn fan accelerated until dust lifted from the rafters. A work light glowed without flickering. For the first time, the system behaved predictably. Dean returned near sunset. He studied the separated arrays, checked the disconnects, then looked at Clara's notebook. "You stopped asking them to be identical," he said. Clara nodded. The weak panels had never been useless. She had simply placed them in the wrong herd. But when the sun dropped behind the ridge, every fan slowed and stopped. Clara had solved how the panels could work together. She had not solved darkness, and the summer heat would not wait for her to find another answer. That night, Clara spread every electric bill across the kitchen table and drew 3 columns on butcher paper: must run, can wait, and waste. The first column held ventilation, water, emergency lights, and the camera system. The second held the well pump, tool chargers, feed grinding, and the freezer. The third was longer than both: fluorescent tubes humming in empty rooms, heat cables warming unused pipes, fans running at full speed in cool weather, and an old refrigerator nobody had opened in months. Until then, Clara had treated every electrical demand as equally urgent. But the barn did not need everything at once. It needed the right work done at the right hour. By sunrise, she had crossed out 3 loads completely and moved 4 others into daylight. She replaced the worst lights with LEDs, repaired the dragging fan motor, and put timers on every charger. The well pump remained the hardest problem. It had always started whenever pressure dropped, whether the sun was high or the farm was asleep. Clara stood beside the old pressure tank, listening to its cycle, and realized she was trying to store electricity when the animals only needed stored water. The next morning, she ran the pump only during strong sunlight and filled a raised tank behind the barn. After sunset, gravity carried that water to the troughs without asking the panels for another watt. Clara watched the pump stop while the water kept moving. The barn did not need a giant battery for every chore. Some work could wait. Some energy could become height, water, cool air, or a charged tool. Clara placed her hand against the tank as darkness settled over the yard. She had not solved night. She had changed what night was allowed to demand. The tank was her battery. Over the next 6 weeks, Clara turned the barn's electrical needs into a schedule, written in black marker beside the main door. Water came first. Each morning, the strongest array ran the well pump until the raised tank reached Clara's red line. Only then did power shift to the ventilation fans. Tool chargers came third, followed by the grinder and freezer. Anything unfinished waited for the next clear hour. Clara recorded every cycle in the black notebook. She stopped writing only kilowatt hours and began writing gallons pumped, minutes of airflow, batteries charged, and pounds of feed prepared. The numbers showed something the utility bills had hidden. The barn's largest demands were short, predictable, and movable. On cloudy mornings, Clara delayed grinding feed. On bright afternoons, she filled the tank early and charged every tool before shadows reached the roof. By April, the routine had become automatic. Water first, airflow second, tools third. Everything else waited. One evening, Clara shut down the solar disconnect after sunset and walked through the barn with a flashlight. The fans were quiet, but the rafters had already cooled. The pump was still, but every trough remained full. The grinder was silent, but morning feed waited in sealed bins. Nothing was running, yet the day's work surrounded her. Then 3 cloudy days arrived. The tank dropped lower, tool charging slowed, and Clara had to choose which chores mattered most. She postponed the grinder, reduced freezer cycles, and protected water, ventilation, and emergency controls. The system did not fail. It narrowed. That was the difference between producing power and managing it. By the end of May, Clara's barn used less grid electricity than her kitchen refrigerator. But July was coming, and the panels had never faced a full week of brutal heat. That would test her system. The heat wave arrived on a Monday in July, 3 days earlier than forecast. By noon, the air above Clara's pasture shimmered, and the barn thermometer read 104 degrees. Every fan was running. The strongest arrays fed the ventilation system, while the weaker panels powered the pump and controls. For 2 hours, everything held. Then a cloud bank rolled over the ridge. Solar output dropped. The well pump slowed. One inverter began flashing red, and a burnt plastic smell returned from Array 2. Clara shut it down immediately. Inside the barn, goats crowded near the water trough. Chickens lifted their wings away from their bodies, breathing fast. The temperature climbed another degree. Her neighbors shouted across the fence that the grid voltage was falling across the county. 2 nearby farms had already lost power. Clara opened the black notebook. She could reconnect a red tag panel and recover part of the missing output. It had produced electricity during testing, but its readings changed under heat. For 1 second, she reached toward it. Then she stopped. A system built to survive failure could not depend on something she did not trust. Clara isolated Array 2, switched off the grinder, chargers, freezer, and every light except the emergency strip. All remaining power went to ventilation and pump controls. She opened the repaired ridge vents by hand. The raised tank kept water flowing while the pump rested. By late afternoon, sunlight returned. The fans never stopped. When darkness finally cooled the roof, Clara sat beside the trough with both hands shaking. One array had failed. The grid had weakened. The heat had tested every shortcut she refused to take. Morning would reveal what the animals had survived because of it. The panels had not made her farm invincible. They had made failure survivable. 6 months after the auction, Clara carried a folder of utility statements into the barn and laid them across the feed table beneath the turning fans. The utility inspector stood beside the meter with a second technician. They tested the glass, wiring, main panel, and inverter logs. Nothing was stuck. Nothing had been bypassed. The meter was simply recording almost no grid use. Clara arranged 7 bills in a row. Before the project, the barn had cost between $800 and $900 a month to operate during extreme weather. Since February, the grid had supplied only backup electricity during several cloudy nights and one maintenance shutdown. The inspector checked the totals twice in silence. So the barn ran for free? Clara shook her head. The panels cost $40. The trailer cost more. Wiring, disconnects, repairs, and inspection cost money. But for 6 months, the sunlight covered nearly every unit of electricity this barn used. She opened the black notebook. 34 panels had entered the final system. 32 had passed testing without repair. 2 yellow-tagged panels had returned after new connectors and professional inspection. 8 red panels and 4 white ones had been sent for recycling. 4 damaged modules had been kept only for frames and spare parts. Dean walked through the 5 arrays, checking every cable and disconnect. Months earlier, he had told Clara to walk away. Now he closed the panel and nodded. "You didn't make broken equipment new," he said. "You learned exactly where its usefulness ended." Outside, the raised tank overflowed into the trough. 2 thermostats slowed the fans. The meter stopped moving. Walt arrived before the inspector signed the report. He stared at the roof, removed his cap, and asked how many panels Clara could test next week. Nobody laughed. Not this time. 2 weeks after the inspection, Walt returned with a flatbed trailer carrying 27 solar panels removed from a county school. They were newer than Clara's auction lot, but several had shattered corners, faded back sheets, and cables cut close to the junction boxes. Walt did not call them expensive windows. He removed his cap and asked, "Can you tell me which ones still have a job?" Clara almost smiled. She unloaded each panel onto the same barn floor where 5 chalk lines still marked her first experiment. Green, blue, yellow, red, white. But this time, farmers stood nearby with notebooks instead of jokes. Clara tested voltage, current, heat, insulation, and stability under load. She rejected 3 panels immediately. 2 had damaged backs that could let moisture reach live parts. 1 developed a hot spot before noon. She marked them red and refused to sell hope where safety was required. 17 panels passed. 7 more needed connectors, seals, or further testing. By sunset, Walt had stopped asking whether the damaged panels were valuable. He was asking what work they could safely perform. Within a month, Clara was testing small batches for neighboring farms. 1 powered a fence charger. Another ran a greenhouse fan. A matched group pumped water into a hillside tank. She wrote every result in the black notebook and attached a plain label: tested, limited, repairable, or recycle. The service did not make her rich, but it paid for replacement cables, safer disconnects, and the next winter's feed. More important, it changed what the town brought her. People arrived with cracked panels, tired pumps, old batteries, and machines someone else had already declared finished. Clara never promised miracles. She only promised to test before judging. She had bought 50 panels to save 1 barn. Now others brought her discarded power. At sunset, Clara climbed the ladder beside the barn and stood beneath the mismatched roof built from discarded equipment. Below her, goats moved toward the trough, fans turned slowly, and the raised tank released the last water pumped during daylight. 34 panels still worked above her. 12 had been recycled. 4 remained in the workshop as spare frames and hardware. Clara ran one hand across a faded module. Its glass carried scratches no cleaning could remove. Its label promised more than it delivered, but every morning it still helped fill the tank before noon. That was what the auction crowd had missed. Damage was not one condition. Some panels were unsafe. Some needed repair. Others were simply weaker, older, or suited to smaller work. Clara had not rescued them by pretending they were perfect. She had tested them, separated them, rejected the dangerous ones, and designed the barn around the limits of those that remained. She folded the red auction sign and placed it inside the black notebook. Then she wrote a question. What have people thrown away because nobody tested it properly? The sun disappeared behind the ridge. The panels went dark, but water continued flowing into the trough. The animals were calm. The batteries were charged. Morning feed waited in sealed bins. Nothing about the system was perfect. Every essential job was finished. Clara closed the notebook and walked toward the house while stored water moved through the darkness. If you have ever rescued a field, a machine, a building, or a dream someone else had dismissed, share what it was. Your story may help another person keep trying. Sometimes resilience is not finding something that never broke. Sometimes it is learning exactly what the broken pieces can still do and giving them a chance to prove it.